So by now, I'm sure everybody's seen the clip earlier this week. Joe Biden, once again confronted by a Democrat, asked him about his policies, and Biden goes berserk. You know, he kind of grabs the guy's jacket a little bit in a very bizarre and bullish way, touches him, and then tells him, after berating him a little bit, accusing him of being a Sanders supporter when he was actually a Steyer reporter, then tells him you ought to vote for somebody else. And as I pointed out a couple weeks ago, that should just be Joe Biden's campaign slogan, because that's all he seems to want to tell voters who question him on the campaign trail. Joe Biden 2020, you ought to vote for somebody else. And honestly, that's good advice too. You ought to vote for somebody else, because Joe Biden ain't it. I mean, we have seen not just report, all right? We have seen video after video after video after video of Joe Biden attacking these voters who have legitimate concerns about his policies and his platform. They walk up to him, most of them, calmly, collectively, and say, hey, I have an issue with your stance on pipelines. Well, listen here, child, you ought to vote for somebody else. You probably vote for Bernie Sanders. And then he gets pissed and walks off. You know, back in 2016, we heard a lot of comments from establishment Democrats about Bernie Sanders and his temperament, because Bernie Sanders seemed a little standoffish, and Bernie Sanders would kind of, tell people what for right to their face. He wouldn't ever touch them the way that Joe Biden always seems to, in an intimidating way, but Bernie wouldn't back down, and he was a little bullish, but not as a bully. And they always told us back then he doesn't have the temperament to be president. We talk about temperament of the president today, that Donald Trump doesn't have the temperament. He's too quick to anger, too quick to fly off the handle. So where are all those stories about Joe Biden, right? That's what I want to know. Joe Biden is not that different from Donald Trump in terms of how they are as human beings. They cannot handle criticism. They cannot handle tough questions. And they just don't want to deal with people who they seem to disagree with. Then you look at a guy like Bernie, who isn't afraid to walk up to people who straight up say, I don't agree with you. And what does he do? He explains to them why he's right. He doesn't get in their face and say, well, then you ought to vote for somebody else. Elizabeth Warren doesn't walk up to people and say, well, you ought to vote for somebody else. Even Yang and Buttigieg and Steyer and Bloomberg and Klobuchar and Gabbard and whoever the hell else is still running for president, none of them get in anybody's face and tell them you ought to go vote for somebody else. But Joe Biden does, and he says that at the drop of a hat, at the first sign of somebody not agreeing 100% with him. You ought to go vote for somebody else. And again, that is the best possible advice I can give to anyone considering voting for Joe Biden in the primaries. You ought to go vote for someone else. What are you doing? It's over. The video's over. I'm done complaining about everything, and that's it. The end. Leave. Well, okay, if you're going to stick around, maybe you should give us a like, a comment, a share, just subscribe to stay connected with all of our content. Or maybe you should consider becoming a member for some exclusive content and perks. Just follow the link in the description. Now, go. Just go.